Back in 2014, which feels like 10 years ago instead of just 4, I created this channel and I didn't think I'd last a month. I had no idea what I was doing, but all I knew at the time was that I was having fun. And now, 4 years, 230 videos, and over 1,100 subscribers later, I still don't know what I'm doing, but I'm still having fun, and that's what matters. Since 2014, I've completely expanded my horizons when it comes to making videos and putting my stuff out there, both on YouTube and on other forms of social media, and I would not have been able to do that without you guys. Yes, I've been really dedicated to this channel, but it's your guys' support that helped with that motivation. So thank you guys so much once again. If you're new here, welcome, and if you've been here for 2, 3, or 4 years, thanks for sticking it out with me. Keep watching and rock on. So as I promised back in late August, I will be doing a Q&A. I said this would be posted in early September, but that unfortunately did not work out, so I apologize. I definitely didn't intend for it to be this late. But I wanted to take the time to not only say thank you, but also to interact with you guys a little more. And thanks to everyone's participation here and on Twitter, I will be doing just that. Over the past few weeks, I received some really good questions, and I'm very excited to answer them for all you guys. Some of them took a lot of thinking, and some of them I'm gonna have some fun with. Before we start off with the questions I received, I wanted to answer a question that I actually answered for someone a while ago, but still want to answer for the rest of you guys. And that is, why American Nightmare? In other words, why that name for my channel? And I am so glad someone asked that, because as proud as I am of my channel name, I often wondered if people wouldn't understand it or maybe even take it the wrong way. But it's actually a little bit of a satirical name. The phrase stuck with me after I had heard someone, I don't know if it was from a documentary or somewhere on TV, say that rock and metal music was basically a cultural nightmare in America. And this was years ago. It might have been on VH1 or MTV, one of those two. So my name is kind of a jab at that old-fashioned idea that rock music corrupts America, which obviously is very, very inaccurate. Plus, ever since I was a kid, I would get weird looks from people when I showed them what I listened to, which is very amusing to see even now. So it's also kind of poking fun at myself and the music genre in general. Rock and heavy metal music can either unite people, fascinate people, or scare them away completely, and that's partly why fans like me love it so much. Now, let's go ahead and get started with these other questions. The first question I received comes from one of my Twitter followers. @VegeDeer asked, which song is most important to you? This is one I really had to think about, and I actually had some difficulty coming up with an answer for a little while, which I really appreciate because I love simple questions that can really make something like a Q&A interesting. My first thought was obviously a Chris Cornell song because all of his music is important to me, but of course the question was, which song? Well, like I said, I thought about it for a few days, and I would have to say the most important song to me is I Am the Highway by Audioslave. That was a song that really spoke to me, and it was one of the first songs I heard as I was discovering Chris Cornell's music. I think I was about 14 when I first heard it, and when I read the lyrics, that helped to establish Chris Cornell not only as one of my favorite singers, but also as one of my favorite songwriters. It's a very complex song with a simple message, and that's sort of how I always thought of his writing. He would take a very simple thought or idea, but explain it, or sing it, in such a complex way because that seemed to be his thought process, but you could still understand it. The lyrics are metaphorical, but they just clicked with me. It's a mellow song, but lyrically it's very uplifting to me. It expressed confidence, and it instilled confidence. It said to me, I can get by on my own because I know I have the ability to do so because this is who I am. And that message just stuck with me, and that opened the door to Chris Cornell's other work for me. I think it was after I heard that song that I knew I just had to listen to Soundgarden. I had to listen to everything else he did because he's got something to say and I needed to hear it. I have so many other songs of his and by other musicians that I considered important, but really thinking about it, I Am the Highway is one of the first that comes to mind. Thank you @VegeDeer for your question. That one really made me think, and once again, I really appreciate that. The next couple of questions come from Atticus Reed on YouTube. What Alice in Chains song in terms of lyrics had the biggest impact on you? Favorite Audioslave Soundgarden song? Let's start off with the first one. Lyrically, the one Alice in Chains song that comes to mind that had the biggest impact on me was Nutshell. Even before I listened to the song in full, that one line, "If I can't be my own, I'd feel better dead," just stuck with me. It's dark, but at the same time, I really admired the message of being true to yourself and your own identity. It's something that I've always tried to live by, and a song like that made me appreciate Lane Staley even more as a singer and songwriter. My favorite Audioslave song would definitely be Shadow on the Sun. It was the first Audioslave song I ever heard, and the first song by Chris Cornell that I heard. That one basically launched me into Chris Cornell's work. I've told this story in my videos before, but I first heard it when I was about 11 years old after I had asked my mom who her favorite singer was. Her answer, of course, was Chris Cornell, and at the time I didn't fully know who he was, so then she gets all excited and says, "Oh, you gotta hear this guy's voice!" and puts this song on, and that was pretty much it. Then, a few years later, I got into Soundgarden, which leads me right into this last question. My favorite Soundgarden song is definitely Fell on Black Days. Much like Shadow on the Sun got me into Audioslave, that was the song that got me into Soundgarden. I was about 14, and once I found that song, I stole my mom's copy of A-Sides and spent an entire summer listening to Soundgarden. Fell on Black Days was just something completely different for me at the time. I knew right away that there was a major difference between Chris Cornell's two primary bands. The song was so sad, but I loved how mellow it was, I loved his voice, and I loved the lyrics. It's so hard to describe how the lyrics made me feel and how Chris's songwriting makes me feel, but he didn't just write simply with a song like that. It was intelligent and honest, and that's how and why people like me could relate to it and appreciate it, even though I never lived the life he did. So a song like that, in my opinion, transcended not just grunge music, but songwriting in general. Chris Cornell just knows how to write. Thank you, Atticus Reed, for your questions. Thinking about my answers really took me back a few years. This next question comes from Paul McCallan on YouTube. What is your favorite Alice in Chains song? That would definitely have to be Wood. Once again, this was one of the first songs of theirs that I had heard. I know, there's a trend here, isn't there? But the composition of the whole song just absolutely intrigued me. When I was about 15, I had seen Singles for the first time, and I had heard that song for about 2 seconds during the movie, and at the same time I was listening to a lot of Soundgarden at the time, so because of that I was hearing a lot about Alice in Chains, but it took me a bit to get into them. So when I finally wanted to, I chose the song that kept following me around everywhere, which, of course, was Wood. I had only known one other song of theirs at the time, Them Bones, which I had actually grown up with. I think I heard it when I was about 3 years old, and it scared the hell out of me, but in a good way. But Wood is definitely my all-time favorite because I love the way Lane Staley sings in it, the harmonization between Jerry Cantrell and Lane, and the overall mood of the song, how musically it's both kind of psychedelic and bluesy at the same time, which really fits the lyrics. I think the fact that it's a tribute to their friend Andrew Wood made it even more powerful because it was very personal for the band. That was something that quote-unquote grunge bands did best. Personal songs that people loved, even if it dealt with something that they weren't as familiar with, like I had said earlier with Soundgarden. Thank you to Paul McCallan for your question. I absolutely love talking about my favorite bands. Next question is also from someone on YouTube, user Gandalf the Grey. That is an awesome name, by the way. Do you listen to Incubus? If so, what are your favorite albums or songs? You know, I'm not as familiar with Incubus. I've heard a few songs on the radio, but I never took the time to really get into that band. The few songs I did hear, though, I really liked. I know I've heard one of their latest songs, Nimble Bastard, on the radio, and I really enjoyed it. I've also heard Megalomaniac and Drive a few times too, and I really like those as well. I think I may have heard a couple of other songs from Make Yourself, because I recognize that album cover. But if you have any other recommendations, I'd love to hear them. They seem like a really cool band. Gandalf the Grey, thank you so much for your question, and I hope to hear some Incubus recommendations from you. It's good to hear something different once in a while. Now this next one comes from a grunge fanzine on Twitter by the name of Knee High Stripes Seattle. What got you started doing your videos on YouTube? That is a really good question. It started out as a new hobby, but I was already really getting into computer art and video making. I was listening to a lot of music too, so I decided to just combine all three. Before, I was just drawing a lot and writing a bunch of lyrics in journals, but I started realizing that I was not a very good artist on paper, so I turned to digital art. Like my taste in music, I really wanted to keep my channel versatile, so I wanted to do basically any kind of music that began or ended in rock. I think at one point I did a couple of Imagine Dragons songs because a friend of mine asked me to, and even though I wasn't really into that band, I borrowed a couple of albums and just went for it. I know I'm mostly a grunge channel at this moment, but I still try to mix things up and keep it interesting and diverse. Thank you so much for your question. My next question is from someone on YouTube under the name Sean Crazy Sean 2. If I asked you to do a lyric video for Soundgarden's Tighter and Tighter, would you? I think it's my favorite Soundgarden song. Yes! I've actually been listening to Tighter and Tighter a lot lately. I love that song, and it's definitely one of my favorites too. I own the song, so I can get started on it as soon as possible. Thank you for your question, Sean. The last couple of questions I actually received through direct message on Twitter, so just because they were asked privately, I'll keep them anonymous. Both of these users are people I've talked with and interacted with a lot on Twitter, and they both asked some really good questions. This one in particular was another one that got me thinking. What song do you feel like was the first time you truly heard music? What's the song that first made you think, like, holy shit, music is really f***ing powerful? Or you could even just choose a whole album or just an artist that made you feel that way. I love this question. So of course my first instinct was to answer Chris Cornell and Audioslave's self-titled album with Shadow on the Sun, which did really make me think about how powerful music is and can be. But actually I'd probably go back even further than that. When I was about 6 or 7, I would always go to my great-grandma's house, and every so often she'd play these opera tapes. She had this cassette player from the 1980s, and she'd play a lot of Pavarotti and a lot of other Italian opera singers. I was raised on opera and Broadway musicals for about the first 10 years of my life. Andrew Lloyd Webber was a favorite of mine, but there was one specific opera from my grandma's collection that I just fell in love with. I can't remember who sang it or what the opera was even called, but the story was about a man going to prison and he had to leave his girlfriend, and he was so upset about having to leave her, he was so depressed about his time away from her. And I didn't speak Italian, so I had no idea what they were saying. I only knew about the story because my grandma explained it to me. But even though I couldn't interpret the songs directly, I could just hear the pain and grief in the man's voice, and that alone was enough to make me appreciate it and made me realize just how impactful music is. It doesn't even have to be in English or your native language to still hit you just in the right spot and strike a chord with you. Hearing that opera at such a young age was an amazing experience, and I swear I'm going to make sure I find that tape. Thank you so much for your question. That memory with my grandma is one I especially love and cherish, and your question brought up that memory again, so thank you so much. So I thought we'd end this Q&A on a more humorous note. The last two questions I have are some really funny and cool ones, and they come from a viewer outside the US. The first question from this person is, if you're a crime or mystery author, what character do you want to give to Alice in Chains? Killer, private detective, police, victim, medical examiner, or CIA agent? I gotta say, this is definitely the funniest question I received. I love it! I could honestly picture Jerry Cantrell as one of those, like, cliché detectives. As soon as I saw this picture, the one where he posed with the smug bastard indoors with sunglasses on pose, I immediately thought of that guy from CSI Miami. You know, the one with all the cheesy one-liners. I could just picture Jerry spouting a bunch of corny lines in a detective story, and Mike Inez would be his sidekick or something. I could also picture, like, Lane Staley or Sean Kinney playing one of those private detectives from the 1950s who says, "I'm gonna crack this case wide open," except in a way more exaggerated voice. Lane could even be a CIA agent. Didn't he dress up like Albert Wexler from Resident Evil once or twice? Mike Starr would probably be one of those, like, first couple of suspects without actually being the killer. He'd show up within the first few chapters, and his most prominent line would be, "I didn't do it, man!" Now that would be one damn funny crime story. Anyway, the last question here is from the same person. What Hogwarts house are you? I am a proud Gryffindor. I've been a Harry Potter nerd ever since the movies started coming out. For like 10 years, I went and saw all the movies, I bought all the movies, I bought all the books, I took the quizzes, I even dressed up like a witch a couple times for Halloween. Man, I still watch those movies. I don't care what anyone says, you are never too old for a classic like Harry Potter. But yeah, I am a Gryffindor. Thank you so much to the person who asked these questions. I had a lot of fun with these. Alright, so that concludes the Q&A. Thank you so much to everyone once again for submitting your questions. I had so much fun doing this, and I'm sorry I posted this a couple weeks late. And of course, thank you to everyone else for all the support and for helping me reach 1,000 subscribers and counting. I can't wait to see what else is in store for this channel. I'll see you all again very soon.